I wanted to start, and I know not all of us follow the same faith, or some of us have more of a faith life than others, but I can't let today go by this morning without starting with great gratitude. Today we remember God's love for us, and may this bring new meaning and change to your life. Wishing all of you a very blessed Good Friday. So I hope that's received in the intention from my heart. So I've not been an attendee here in the past, and many of you, I understand, are here every month. So gosh, that's just amazing. So this is a little bit, many new faces here, a couple familiar faces. It's so good to see. So I want to talk today, spend my time sharing with you a little bit about being true to yourself. And I want to walk it through how I learned to be true to myself. But I think it's a challenge that we often think we are, and at times get confused in our identity through our work, through being a parent, or otherwise. And so it's a real opportunity, and I hope you can take away a nugget of the information that might be helpful in your own life. Through my story and experiences, that's my hope for you today. So there are some things I would tell my younger self if I had the opportunity. Have you guys ever thought about that before? If I could talk to my younger self, right, on every level, right? There's so many things I wish I knew then that I know now. So what I wish I could tell my younger self is just exactly this. Be true to yourself. Like, I think about my younger years of life and trying to fit in, right? Anybody else have that feeling where you wanted to fit in when you were a kid in school? Maybe I was just an oddball, but I always wanted to fit in because I didn't want to stand out. And I think I would tell my younger self, quit worrying about that. Be you. Be true to yourself. But much of my life under 20 was truly, as I reflected on it, more about fitting in than it was being true to myself. Actually, if I had to say what my identity was under the age of 20, I would say my identity was fitting in wherever I was at, right? You kind of wanted to fit in with this group or that group, or wherever you were at, right? So we were constantly changing. You cannot be true to yourself when in fact we are always trying to fit in. And for some of us, it lasts longer than others. For some, you realize that very quickly and become, or maybe have really amazing parents who point out to stop doing that. I had wonderful parents. I just didn't learn that lesson. I was also quite stubborn. Honestly, as an adult, realizing that fitting in is such a temporary thing, right? We become chameleons when we're always trying to fit in. Sometimes I work with people. I had the blessing to run a bank. I had the blessing to be the president of Star Financial Bank for this market here in Northeast Indiana. And during that time, I had the blessing to work with people, we worked together, my coworkers who were trying to fit in. So in that window of time that I had with them, it was really a great opportunity to help them see how to uniquely be themselves and fit in, right? It's not one or the other. How do we work together but honor who you are? Because that's the voice, that's the talent, that's the expertise. We need to hear from them is their uniqueness while also playing within the sandbox that we were playing in at the bank at the time. And I think those lessons perpetuate throughout life. So again, I would tell my younger self, if I had the opportunity, to roll back time and learn that much, much earlier. So I believe being true to yourself, one of my favorite people under the sun is Brene Brown. Is anyone familiar with Brene? Yeah. You don't get to, yeah, woohoo. Has she not changed our lives? And just the way she speaks and talks, and some of the things kind of shock me sometimes when I hear, the words that she chooses, but it's good, right? Like whoa, wait, what did she say? Let me play that again or read that again. But I really love this. And this quote I have up here on the screen for you is one that to me defines leadership. I was confused. I grew up in Indiana, not Fort Wayne, but I grew up in Indiana and then moved away. We moved back here 25 years ago to Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne was never home before then. And as I really think about leadership, I think prior to the last 20 years, the circles I ran in, the people I worked with, the areas I was exposed to, I always thought leadership was a position. Anybody else ever share that feeling? Raise your hand if you did. Yeah, I see a lot of heads nodding. And you all probably got smarter far before me. But I thought it was a title. I thought it was a position, right? I didn't realize many of the things I did, even when I was a young girl, were leadership things. I learned that. So what I love about Brene Brown and her quote and her work, and I want to read this quote to you that's on the screen. She says, any person who holds themselves accountable for finding potential in people and processes and has the courage and guts to develop their potential. When she said that, like I kind of was figuring some things out. I was a little older, a little more mature and experienced. And when I came across this quote years ago, it knocked my shoes off because I thought, that's it. I've been a leader my whole life. And my parents, when I was a young child, and to this day, would joke about, you were a born leader. And I'm like, what does that mean? Like, what are you talking about? And they said, you just have a way that you push people. You say things, you do things, you care, you listen. And I'm like, that doesn't have a title with it. Well, I later learned, and I think this is what we all have, right? We are all leaders. So I'd like to do a quick exercise. Just a quick question for you. Everyone has to participate, so let's get that out. Raise your hand if you are a leader. Yeah, everybody in the room. I should have probably asked that. Did everybody raise their hand? Did anyone not raise their hand? It looked like they all went up. How about our young lady over here? Did you raise your hand? Okay, good. She's still in, is it okay to say? Still, she's a high school interning here. So yes, you are a leader, smart leader at that. What have you raised your hand, and be honest here, what have you raised your hand if I had asked you that question, if you're a leader, prior to reading you the quote? Yeah. Anybody would not have raised their hand if I had asked that question before reading the quote? No? Oh, good. You guys are smart. So let's skip forward to the end of my comments here. So that's awesome, you guys. That's just fabulous that you realize that, because it's not the same. I just was in Las Vegas a few weeks ago speaking at a industry conference, and I asked a similar question, and over half of the room, and these are titled people with titles, didn't raise their hand if they weren't the top ranking, a CEO. It scared me. They were from all different parts of the country, so maybe Fort Wayne in the Midwest and Northeast Indiana, we've got something figured out. No, and I seriously mean that. I was shocked. These people are Fortune 500 kind of people, and they didn't raise their hands if they didn't have CEO position title. So a leader truly does have the opportunity to inspire others. That's leadership, inspiring people. That little sister that I adopted from Big Brothers Big Sisters. Wherever you are in life, loving, caring, listening, that's the true game we're in, and being authentic to ourselves, doing it our way, doing it your way individually. but still fitting into that context. One of my very all-time favorite leaders who never had a title, I don't think she ever had an office, is Mother Teresa. I just have always had a fondness for what she accomplished with so little. And she's been widely recognized as a leader who has significant impact on the world. Are any of you familiar with Mother Teresa? Yeah, she's just had such impact on this world. But she never had a title. She wasn't a CEO. But she was a CEO of compassion in her actions, helping the poorest of the poor and giving a hand up. She inspired and motivated others through her examples that she lived, being true to herself. The way she lived, and I challenge each of us, the way we live is being true to ourselves. Mother Teresa leadership has been recognized in many, many ways, including the Nobel Peace Prize. Who would ever think that someone who led and lived by compassion would receive the Nobel Peace Prize? I think that's a humanitarian Nobel Peace Prize. I think that's pretty amazing. And what an honor. I think that happened in 1979. I have written in my notes, but I could be off. So what kind of leader are you? What kind of title does it take for you to be the leader you expect to be? Or does it take a title? But what kind of leader are you? What do you want to be known for? What do you want your legacy to be? You know, we often get caught up in the day-to-day fitting in, and it happens to all of us. I mean, I hope you'll be honest with yourself at some point. It happens, right? We don't want to not fit in. It's just part of our natural wiring. But this time we spend here on earth is a speck of eternity. Whatever your faith life, whatever your faith journey is, whatever you believe in is great. But we can all agree this is a speck of time. A speck of time. What do you want your legacy to be by being true to your unique self? We're each uniquely made, therefore, we need to live into that uniqueness. So what kind of leader, what legacy do you want to leave behind from your unique self? It's a great question. I challenge you to ponder that for yourselves at this weekend or through the coming weeks, but it's a question that we can never stop thinking about. One of the all-time quotes that changed my life, literally, made a huge, huge difference in my life, is this here, this quote from Theodore Roosevelt, actually a speech, not a quote. It's the citizenship in the Republic. And it's also been more commonly referred to as the man in the arena. Oh, it's so good. It moved me to think about how I was living my life and how I was leading others around me through influence, including my own children. And so I'll read it with you. It's not the critical who count. It's not about the man who points out the strong man who stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done it better. The credit belongs to the person who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred with blood, sweat, and dust, who at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and at its worst, if he fails. He fails daring greatly. When I learned this, came across it, read it many, many years ago, I thought about how much of a judge I had been. You know, oh, well, they're an expert at that, and they didn't quite do it all the way. Why didn't they have the courage to do that? You know, meanwhile, I'm sitting in the stands, if you will, in the arena, making those comments, right? And we've all, well, many of us have done this before. But the truth of the matter is, until we get down into the arena and get into the battle, get into the doing of it all, we don't really have that right to be in judgment or to have an opinion even, unless asked or solicited. Growing up, my parents, and this also reflects it, always taught me, and our mantra, many of us in the Midwest who came from farm families might share this, but hard work, right? It actually kind of, I had to work out of that later in life because I thought that was life, hard work, because it was so ingrained in my brain. But this is exactly what Theodore Roosevelt in his speech is describing. We have to work hard. This belongs to the man who is in the arena. We've all seen people take credit for things they shouldn't take credit for. And they didn't earn that. They weren't in the arena. They were in the stands or standing outside. Resilience. I mean, this speaks directly to resilience. Failure is part of the process, but encourages us to push forward in the face of setbacks, right? That is, and guiding others toward a common goal. It's not the critical who counts. It's not about the man who points out the strong man who stumbles, right? But it's guiding others towards the end goal. That's being in the game, in the arena. I want to share with you just a few what I'll call life lessons. And they came from segments, 3 specific segments. I'm going to start with my childhood. And I want to just tell you a couple quick stories that fit into these moments that I've shared. What Brene Brown writes, what Theodore Roosevelt speech meant to me and how it changed my life. And then other areas that more personally and intimately changed my life or shaped who I am today as a leader. So I thought about, the 3 biggest experiences of childhood growing up for me. First was, and I tell the story and people are in awe. I didn't realize it was so different. But I remember saying to my parents in about 3rd grade, can we just have a normal holiday? A normal Easter, a normal Thanksgiving, a normal Christmas. And you might be wondering, what does she mean, right? We never had a holiday. I wanted to fit in, remember the age here, childhood. None of my friends, they all did, very family-focused things, but not at our house. We never had a holiday that I can remember, seriously, that I can ever recall, that didn't include a stranger. My mother is a social worker, and in our community where she's still living and still actively involved in the community, they refer to her as the current Mother Teresa, and she is. And I'm so thankful for that. But during my childhood, it shaped who I became as an adult. I mean, these would be children from the foster home. They might be others from wherever, domestic violence. But we never had a holiday without strangers at our table. And that forever shaped who I became as an adult. And then there's the part of childhood that, it was interesting. We never really had a curfew. And you might be thinking, oh my gosh, what kind of parents did she have? I had amazing parents. I had 2 of the most amazing people. They didn't work together. They eventually divorced when I was going into high school. But individually, they each were such incredible people. But growing up, I never had a curfew. All of my friends had hardline curfews. And I thought that was always, again, I didn't fit in. I'm like, Mom and Dad, why don't I have a curfew? But they taught me then what I didn't realize until I became an adult. It's about trust. It's about trust, right? Wow, that was a lot of rope to give. I couldn't imagine when I became a mother not having a curfew or having them on my iPhone so I could see where they were their location was. And I think we didn't even have, I mean, they had no idea where we were, but it's about trust and values. And the last one I would pick off this list that also significantly shaped my life was there used to be a drugstore in my small town, and I think it might have been from Fort Wayne, Hook's Drugs. They were here. Okay. Was that headquartered here? Anyway, okay. So it was in my small little town where, yes, they were. Somehow I heard that, learned it, read it somewhere. Hook's Drugstore. In second grade, we went in to pick up supplies in the evening. Both my parents worked. In fact, my mother was still in finishing her master's. And so we were going to school together, and we had to pick something up for a project, and we just ran into the little Hook's Drugstore in our town. And it was the first time I ever saw a person of color that I remember. And I couldn't stop staring at this person of color. I'd never seen it. Can you imagine? It was like an alien, honestly. And I don't mean that with any disrespect. It was so incredibly different to experience that. And so my mother came to me and said, it's not polite to stare. We'll talk about that in the car. And I could not stop staring. It was just so fascinating to me. We lived in a small town, and I suppose I lived under a rock to some degree. But what happened out of that forever changed my life. When we got in the car, after we checked out with our pencils or whatever we needed to buy some paper, my mother began to explain to me about diversity that we all read and is so much more popular and informative today than I knew that. She taught me those things in the car in second grade, leaving Hook's Drugstore from just that one experience. And her story, she might tell it differently, but her story resonated with me that we're all different. And that can mean different shapes and sizes and colors and backgrounds. She taught me diversity in a 12-minute car ride home from Hook's. I'm a very, very grateful, blessed woman to be able to have those experiences. We all have those in our life, but they do shape who we become as people sitting in this room today in our seats and chairs. Now, there was a lot of other stories I could tell that also shaped who I was, that might bring a lot of not so pleasant experiences. And we can each do that as well. It's a choice. It's a choice we make. It's a choice we make to find what made us great in who we are, or find all of the things that make us a poor victim of our circumstances, right? I got to choose that. As an adult, I got to choose, right? I can look at the dark side and the dumpy stuff, and we all have it. Well, everyone I've ever met. Maybe some of you in the room don't. I would say check yourself if you're in the arena or in the stands. We all have stuff, but you get to choose. Do I want to make that stuff define me, or do I want to find what defines me that's made me better? I'd share just a quick minute. I'm checking time. Are we good on time still, Scott? Thanks. You just kind of keep track of me because I can talk a lot. About my early career. So my very first job was in banking, and I was actually still in college. I was finishing my senior year. It was in my small little town. This big, huge bank had moved to my town, and they couldn't get anyone to move there that was like ready to, move into their real careers. And so they started to approach a few of us that were in our latter years of college, and it ended up working out perfectly because they also helped pay for our educations. But my job was, in my early career, kind of marketing, PR, chief quality officer was the title. It was a very small bank, Bank One Marion. At that time, it was like a McDonald's franchise for anyone who didn't, because you didn't have Bank Ones in Fort Wayne until much later, recently. I think Tom Bloom was the president and when they bought NBD. So you saw them later, but early in life, they had their own unique way in each market of doing their banking business. And I compare it to McDonald's because we're all obviously familiar with a McDonald's. If you eat at a McDonald's in Fort Wayne or if you eat at a McDonald's in South Carolina, the hamburger tastes the same, right? The bank was the same. You'd get the same name of a checking account in Marion as you would in Columbus, Ohio, or any other market that they were in. Okay, it's still, the product tasted like that hamburger, right? Still the same flavor. But you had a lot of liberty to do many of your own things. And one of the projects, soon after I took the position in 1986, we started a project called Coats for Kids. They had a community piece they wanted to do. I will tell you, to this day, it's one of my most rewarding pieces of work I ever did. And I've had a very incredible career in the banking world, including being the president of a bank here in Fort Wayne. And I'm thankful for those. I'm humbled and thankful for those. But the Coats for Kids and those projects where we actually got to get into the community and serve, wow. Do you think I would have that much value in it if my mother hadn't had the conversations at Hooks, or I hadn't had a stranger at every holiday dinner who came from far less fortunate circumstances than us? Do you think I would have named that one? We gave out the first year 900 coats. That's not that many, but it was huge. It was like my wedding day, which came many years later in that moment. There was so much joy. So my early career taught me things. To be different was okay, right? To be different in a way that was, I was still going to college and I got this really huge title. Thank goodness that had my parents who grounded me, because I could have thought I was something, and I never did. I just kept working hard. I just kept wanting to serve and give back. The downside is work always came before friendships. That also came from my parents. And it is the one thing I don't feel victim of, because they didn't realize it either. But all that talk we have in the Midwest about we should be proud, we're known for in Indiana and the Midwest, is we're hard workers, is sometimes people, probably not any of you, get confused with the literalness of hard work, right? So I've got to work hard. What do you mean rest? What do you mean put my feet up? What do you mean? I'm literally 24/7 doing something, right? At home, you're working, you're putting in the garden, you're cleaning the house, you're doing the whatever, right? So for me, with friendships, I didn't make that enough of a priority. I didn't value that till far later in life, but it was a good lesson to understand that hard work is great, but it's not the only thing in our lives. And then in my life came marriage. So early career, Bank One Marion, Chief Quality Officer, doing great projects, Coats for Kids, reflecting on many just blessings in my life. Marriage. I met my husband in the most godly, appointed way I could imagine. I had a girlfriend who was also a professional woman. Her family owned tire stores in Marion. And we were very close because guess what? We both worked really, really hard. Like we don't have time, but we got each other, right? The rest of my friends probably gave up long before that point in life. So Susie is her first name, had come to me and said, would you go with me to Florida? We have a conference there. Goodyear has a conference there, and we'd love, my husband can't go. I'd love for you to come with me. I'm like, Susie, Goodyear sounds like a bunch of, pardon me, a bunch of old men, and that's the last place I would, and I only got at that time 10 days of vacation, and I couldn't imagine it. And I really didn't have the money either to buy my plane ticket, but I didn't want to mention that. So as it turned out, I went. Her sisters couldn't go. It was meant for me to go. And there I met my husband, who was a Penn State grad, in the finance and marketing area of Goodyear in their corporate offices. And we met sitting at the same table of an event that had 3,000 people. Meant to be? I think so. 3 months later, he asked me to marry him, and a year later, we were husband and wife. I believe that we have to hold out until that right person comes in our life. And we knew it. We've now been married 29 years. It'll be 30 years in July, and every day, there are plenty of hard ones. What I learned was I was pretty solid in who I was before that marriage. And it took flexibility, because I thought flexibility was do it my way. And that wasn't so much, right? All you are much wiser than I. And it takes work. I thought it was natural. Because my parents divorced when I was in 9th grade, amazing people. And I saw a lot of stuff that wasn't so pleasant. And so I was going to take control, right? I was going to make this work. We'll do it my way. No, that's not so much. So what marriage taught me was to have fun, to be open and honest, and definitely be flexible. And then the next chapter of life came, which was around having a family. And I hope some of you can relate to this, but it's the chapters of our life that build our story of where we are today and how we honor who we are, be true to ourselves. So I want to ask you a question, and you don't have to answer it out loud. You're welcome to if you want, but just think about it. I want you to give yourself the respect and answer here. What would you try if you knew people would never say what? What's something you would try if you thought no one else would ever judge it or say, that's the best thing, that's the worst thing, that's an awful thing, whatever. If you weren't a judge, what would you try if you knew people would never say fill in the blank? If you're not coming up with something right now, I see some smiles in the room, so I think either you're really cracking up at the question, or you've got your answer, and it looks like maybe you've got the answer for yourself. If you haven't thought about that before, I challenge you to take that question home and think about it. There's a lot inside of it about how we truly live. I realized this and really kind of came to this question when I started to realize the chapter of life, children. So for those of you who have children in the room, raise your hands. No, most of you, yeah. My kids taught me so much. Like we think about parenting and what we give them, what they gave me. I really learned that hard work, the hardest work was raising my family with my husband. So we've kind of figured out marriage, and then we began to figure out raising our children. He came from different parenting. I came from different parenting. It was messy. And there were some very, very messy conversations, right? But my kids mostly taught us about living my values. They were like a mirror for me, right? They would look at me and say, "What? We don't do that." They were very courageous and very bold, and I so appreciate it. Like I'm like, oh, I never thought about it. It gave me perspective of how I show up, how we show up to each other. My kids are grown now. The oldest is 25, and the youngest is going into his senior year, finishing his junior year at Butler. And I couldn't be more proud and thankful of the young men they're growing into and have become. But they gave me far more than I ever could give to them. And I'm so, so grateful. One of the last things I want to talk about are our yeses and nos. Life lessons for me. Most of what my kids somewhat taught me was saying yes to everything. I'm a yes person. And not because in anything other than I see life and everything in life as an opportunity. We have to check our yeses and nos, particularly when we're people like me. My husband would say to me, how on earth, like I had literally no white space in my calendar because I was yes, 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 oh yeah, church, yep, I'll do that, I'll volunteer, yeah, oh yeah, I can do that, oh yeah, I'd love to help. And it wasn't because I didn't think others couldn't do it. I literally got excited about doing those things. But it cost me something, and that's called life balance. And I realized, but I was so stuck in that way of thinking. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know when to say no. So think about that for yourself. For me, I had to have a guard around me, and it was my husband. He said, okay, here's the deal. You really want to change? Yeah. You aren't allowed to say yes to anything without coming in and coming, like, I'm going to be your filter. We're going to talk it through, and you're going to make a decision if it's really a yes or a no. Like, literally, a 40-year-old woman did that. And that was the hardest thing I ever did because I didn't particularly like people to control me. That felt a whole lot like control. And he said, I'm doing it for you. So I said, oh, how do you do that? He simply said, you're going to say, give me 24 hours to think about it. I'm like, you're so smart. Like, that's so smart. I had no idea how to do that because for 40 years, I had always been a yes person to everything. And what it was costing me is saying no to my family, saying no to lots of other things that really mattered to my core. Did I love them? Absolutely. I just thought it was all part of it. So I would close with just a couple of things and two major milestones that all of this history in my life, and I hope some of it resonates with you and challenges you in ways that you can see others have walked through. The first was in 2007. I went through that yeses and no exercise, and we literally did it, and I became pretty good. Never be great at it, but I think I get a D plus, C minus most of the time. In 2006, we moved to Fort Wayne in 1998, late 1997. And I continued. I worked all those years all over the country with Bank One Corporation doing acquisitions and mergers, the last several. And when we moved to Fort Wayne, our son was a brand new baby, our oldest, our 25-year-old. And so I commuted, and it was back then our airport had no direct flights. If they would have had direct to Dallas, it would have been great because that's where we moved from, and I mostly needed to travel back to. But it would take me a full day travel out, a full day travel back. So I'd be gone most weeks every single day. And that's not the kind of mother I ever dreamed of being. Like, I'd see my kids Friday night, at that time kid. So all that to say, I got this opportunity with a bank called Star Financial Bank. The Marcaselli family are the owners, CEO, and chairman, but they were hiring a market president for Fort Wayne. I soon there interviewed with the board, took the job, and it was the greatest decision I ever made. It's an amazing, amazing, amazing bank. We became like family. It was, you talk about fitting in. I mean, it took time and work, but we were family. I wasn't, but we were. In 2006, I came home from work one day, loved everything about my job, and my husband looked at me at the dinner table and he said, at this time now we have our second son. And he looked at me and he said, you're not having fun, are you? Don't you love it when somebody asks you a question and you're like, whoa, I'm having fun. What do you mean I'm not having fun anymore? He said, the joy's gone out of your eyes. So I thought about that question for about 3 days. And I came back to him and I said, you're right, John. You nailed it. I'm not having fun anymore. There's no joy in my job. It became like I was something I had to do. I didn't love to do anymore. And I decided that I would retire from banking. Now, I didn't know what else to call it because I wasn't leaving for another job, but I was simply retiring from what I was doing to give myself the opportunity to be in better alignment and balance with my family. And it was tough. It was the toughest decision. That was my toughest no that I've ever said. I sat with grown men, the ownership of the bank, and we literally cried. It was hard. It was very hard, but it was the best decision. I somehow knew, and he knew before me, like other times, that I needed to do what I wanted to do. He never asked me to retire. He never said step away. He just could see I wasn't living my true self. Center for Extraordinary Success was born soon thereafter. I knew I couldn't. I was home for about a year and sitting around, and I have the most admiration for stay-at-home moms, by the way, tons. But I found out that's not me. I'm not being true to myself. I had cleaned every closet because I'm a hard worker. I had done everything that could, should, and probably didn't even need to be done. I did it. And so therefore, I started Center for Extraordinary Success. We get to choose clients. I get to choose how many, how few, how much time we spend with them, and incredibly blessed in this chapter. And that chapter started in 2007, 2008. The last thing I want to share with you before we go to some questions is the last defining moment in my life. I thought I had learned, if not all, most lessons in life. There's so much I obviously didn't say that I could have, would have loved to. I'm going to send, if okay and appropriate, a couple of documents that we actually use. Those lessons brought us to, in the Center for Extraordinary Success, some very disciplined tools. And I want to share those with you. It's nothing new. It's not new science, but different maybe application. And I would love to share those with you. So we'll send that out in an email after. But my very last point of life that was as defining as my career and retiring from my career, which was really what I learned, a lot of my identity at that time in my life. May 19th, 2022, I was at a Matt Anthony's Foundation board meeting at 7 o'clock in the morning and my phone rang. I declined it. The phone immediately rang another time and I declined it. I was the chair of the board at the time and didn't feel that it was appropriate to take a phone call. The third time it rang, I knew I needed to answer that call. And I said hello. And upon answering, on the other end was Fort Wayne Police Department. And they said, we have your husband. We need you to come immediately to DuPont Hospital. We live on the north side of town. He's had some massive heart attack at the gym, and we are in process of moving him. That moment, and there's a whole lot to that story, the grace of God, miracles, that forever changed who we are as a family. My husband spent 8 days in a coma. He was 52 minutes without a pulse. He is walking, talking, 100% who he was before. The cardiologists, the neurologists, and every other person said his outcome is medically unexplainable. There are miracles. We have to be open to them. We have to be still and see and be still and know. It was the most defining time in my life. We'll write a book. I mean, it's that to us special. No one will ever buy it. We'll have to give it away. But we want to give hope to other people of what tragedy can look like. He didn't have a heart attack. He had heart failure. Complete electrical heart failure, no explanation, none whatsoever. He works out 7 days a week, 365 days a year, literally Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, he goes to do his cardio. There's no reason. So with that, I'll close and say it's been an honor to speak with you today, to be with you here. I hope something in this story of being true to yourself, to life-defining moments, was valuable for you. God bless. Questions and answers, yeah.